History. History. History.
Hey Nick, welcome to History Street. I'm here with a couple of my friends who you'll meet later on to teach you about the importance of the Gilded Era.
Wow, that's so cool. I didn't know that.
Which happened between 1865 and 1898.
This is amazing.
That's
Hi
right.
There.
Unit 6 in APUSH History Street is super interesting. Right after the Civil War, America went through some reconstruction to build the country back up again, as well as coming to help fuel the Industrial Revolution.
It's super great.
That's really cool.
Hi, Nick.
Hi there.
And there was a lot of change going on in the country at the time, and the Industrial Revolution helped America become stronger economically because of it. Because there were so many different people coming in at the time, ideas were spreading and inventions were made that created huge advancements in technology and work. Because America was no longer at war, it could finally focus on becoming stronger and bigger. Here's a little bit more about the era. Hi, Nick. I'm going to tell you about marketing consumer goods. Today, it's common to see advertisements everywhere, like pop-ups on YouTube videos or billboards along the road.
That's really cool.
Advertising techniques became especially popular in the 19th century in newspapers and posters. Sears, Roebuck & Co. popularized the use of a catalog known as a wish book in order to allow customers to easily access and order the products they had to offer.
That's right. Here's an example of an ad in Macy's catalog from a dress from their women's clothing section.
This is so interesting.
Lots of people today buy things because of their brands and their slogans, like Nike's Just Do It. In the 19th century, companies began to look for new marketing techniques to draw in customers. One of the ways they did this was with catchy slogans, and they also targeted their ads to certain groups of people. Many companies targeted women through their advertisements, such as saying, if you buy this stovetop, you'll spend less time and effort cooking, and you'll have more time to spend with your kids. Before more convenient services were available for people living in more rural areas, local stores were the only suppliers a town or neighborhood could get items from. Cars and trains ended that inconvenience and extended the possibilities of products people could have. People in rural areas would take trains into large urban cities to shop in large department stores like Macy's in New York or Marshall Field in Chicago. Frank Woolworth's 5 and 10 cent stores brought chain stores to urban areas, making for an easy, inexpensive way to get products. To make shopping even easier, Sears used the railroad to mail customers their orders. Customers would order on phone any product they wanted, such as kitchen appliances or clothing. This method of shopping was especially convenient for rural customers. Other methods of marketing included refrigerator cars and canning. The introduction of these two preservation methods allowed food brand Gustavus Swift and other packers to change the eating habits of Americans with mass-produced meats and vegetables. Along with providing many jobs, ads and new marketing techniques promoted a consumer economy and also created a consumer culture where shopping became a favorite pastime.
I never knew that before. Thanks for telling me that.
Alright, now here's a little quiz to see if you're paying attention. Question 1. What are the names of the two largest department stores in urban cities that people travel to? Question 2. How did stores like Sears conveniently ship packages to customers? Question 3. What new form of transportation allowed the long-distance traveling of food items? And here are the answers! Macy's and Marshall Fields were two large department stores in urban cities. Stores like Sears conveniently shipped packages to customers through the railroad. Finally, refrigerator cars were the new form of transportation that allowed long-distance traveling of food items.
Wow, that's so cool.
You sure are right about that.
Can you explain to me?
Sure, during the Industrial Revolution, products were being produced at an accelerating rate, and the massive amounts of goods helped to further the population and technological growth of the United States.
This is amazing!
It really was, and this new boom in production increased the economy of America, making life in the States even better. Well, during the Industrial Revolution, many people died in the factories due to poor working conditions and unsafe machinery, as well as from the spread of diseases from the unclean environment.
That's awful!
Doesn't stop there. Children were forced to work in factories in order to help support their large and impoverished families, and they were frequently used in place of adults where their small frame could reach places that workers couldn't.
It was pretty awful. Here's a picture of two immigrant children working at a factory. Unfortunately, since the machines weren't very safe, kids sometimes lost their fingers or other limbs if they weren't careful. They were also paid a lot less for their work.
Women were mistreated in the Industrial Revolution as well, as they were expected to be economically independent but still legally dependent, as men still held all the rights from them.
That's awful!
It wasn't. The Industrial Revolution exploited the lower class to give riches to the upper class, and many poor and immigrant families who lived in large cities suffered because of this.
That's awful!
Great! Now we're going to test your knowledge of the Industrial Revolution. Question 1. Were women treated fairly during the late 1800s? Question 2. Why did factories employ children? Question 3. What effect did the prominence of factories have on small businesses and farms? And question 4. How did the Industrial Revolution help improve American economy? Well, women were not treated fairly during the Industrial Revolution. Children were employed because they were cheaper and smaller than adults. Large factories ran many small businesses and farms to the ground, as they could produce much more goods than them at a cheaper cost. And the Industrial Revolution was a new height in product manufacturing, and steel, coal, and oil helped fuel the American market.
That's right, and because of these bad working conditions, people formed together to try to improve them. One example of this was the National Labor Union. It was organized with skilled and unskilled workers to pass a law for an 8-hour workday and higher wages. The organization, put together by William Silvis, was completely reliant on political action, not strikes. They also did not allow African Americans to join them.
That's awful!
However, there was a lot of different needs amongst the workers, so the organization eventually crumbled. Here's an example of a political cartoon that the National Labor Union put out to advocate for an 8-hour workday. It describes 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for leisure time. This was ideal so that people would not feel overworked and only ever have time for sleeping and working.
What a cool idea!
There was also the Knights of Labor, created as a secret society by Uriah Stephens. Unlike a national labor union, they admitted everyone and believed that social class was more important than race or gender. They wanted to influence federal government on limits of immigration, child labor restriction, government ownership of railroads, telegraphs, and telephones.
This is amazing!
It was, until the Haymarket Affair happened. May 1st, 1886 was International Workers' Day. A couple days later, on the 4th, a rally at Haymarket Square in Chicago was held. A bomb was thrown into the crowd, killing a police officer and injuring several others.
Man, that sucks.
The Knights of Labor was blamed and associated with anarchy and mob violence. The member population quickly fell, and eventually the Knights of Labor was no more. There was also another group called the American Federation of Labor. Samuel Gompers, the man behind it, was a capitalist and didn't see the need for Reconstruction in America. He knew that personal issues about work could keep laborers together instead of dividing the union like others before him. Keeping it simple was the way to go. AFL was thus formed in 1886, but only skilled workers were able to join. This was because Gompers didn't think that unskilled workers would be useful, and thought he could get more political power from just skilled workers. The union called for strikes and boycotts in the workplace, and the simple but realistic goals of the union made life a lot better for workers during the time that it served. Oh, and there's more. On July 17, 1877, in Martinsburg, West Virginia, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad went on strike because wages were cut and the workers refused to let trains run until the most recent pay cut was returned to the employees. The state militia was called, but sympathized with the workers, so federal government had to be called for assistance. Violence spread and federal soldiers had to take over. Mobs destroyed property, railroad services were shut down, and some spots were blocked and refused to let trains through. This actually takes us to one of our quotes of the day. Our quote of the day is presented by the Albany Argus, Friday, July 20th, 1877. Volume number 18, Editorial: The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Strike. The strike on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad has assumed national importance. The strikes at one point on the road assumed entire progression and control of the property. The point is Martinsburg, Western Virginia. In that state, there are no enrolled and equipped militia that can be called into service by the governor in case of an emergency, and consequently, a demand has been made upon the federal government for troops to be put down the mob. This situation is one that will be deplored by all good citizens. Here's a photograph of some of the destruction that happened during the railroad strike of 1877. Lots of property was destroyed during this time, as you can see in this picture. The public and many newspapers disapproved of both the railroad company's unfair working conditions as well as the violence of the strikes. As depicted in this political cartoon, land and public property was destroyed, and the ordeal caused an economic and transportation disruption that was felt around the country. Of course, there were more strikes. The Homestead strike in Pennsylvania was against Carnegie Steel Company, the nation's strongest trade union. It won steelworkers a 3-year contract, but Andrew Carnegie wanted to break the union by stepping up production demands. However, when workers refused new conditions, Carnegie began locking out workers of the plant. Strikers decided to arm themselves. 10,000 armed strikers lined up against the Pinkerton Guards, who were overwhelmed by the workers and surrendered. This brings us to yet another quote of the day. Our next quote of the day comes from Myron R. Stowell, from an excerpt of the Fort Frick siege. On behalf of 5,000 men, I beg of you to leave here at once. I don't know who you are, nor where you came, but I do know that you have no business here, and if you remain there, will be more bloodshed. We, the workers in these mills, are peacefully inclined. We have not damaged any property, and we do not intend to. If you will send a committee with us, we will take them through the works, carefully explain to them all the details of this trouble, and promise them a safe return to their boats. But in the name of God and humanity, don't attempt to land. Don't attempt to enter these works by force. There were deaths on both sides, and many strikers were arrested. The ordeal inspired workers, but also showed how hard it was to fight against corporation and government when they were working together. Here's a photograph of the Homestead strike depicting a couple of strikers armed and lined up. Finally, there was the Pullman strike, which occurred from May 11th to July 20th, 1894. It was a huge turning point for labor laws, but first was a widespread railroad strike and boycott that disrupted railroad traffic in the Midwest in June and July. It started when the Pullman Car Company made cuts to already low wages and did not make up for it by corresponding rent cuts, leaving workers starving. Workers began to strike and were supported by the American Railway Union, whose members said they wouldn't have any trains using Pullman cars. Thousands of workers would leave their jobs and walk away from their work, making an effective boycott. The federal government response was to create a national holiday, Labor Day, as a gesture towards the American labor movement. Review time. Question 1. What was the difference between the National Labor Union, Knights of Labor, and the American Federation of Labor? Question 2. What caused the railroad strike of 1877? Question 3. What were the results of the Pullman strike? Here are the answers. The National Labor Union did not allow for African Americans and was solely political. The Knights of Labor allowed for everyone and thought class is more important than race. And the American Federation of Labor only allowed skilled workers, had simple but realistic goals, and participated in boycotts. The railroad strike was caused by pay cuts that didn't correspond with lower rents, which left workers and their families starving. The Pullman strike inspired some workers, but also showed how hard it was to go up against government and corporation combined.
Hi there!
Now we're going to talk about inventors and their inventions. Samuel F.B. Morse is the first inventor we're going to cover. He was well educated, he went to Yale and Harvard, and later went to school in England. At school, he was very interested in painting and electricity. He went through many seminars on electricity, but he focused on painting. After going to school in England, he moved back to America and worked on inventing the telegraph. The telegraph radically changed the speed of communication and allowed people to transmit messages much more quickly.
Here is a picture of Mr. Morse and his invention of the telegraph. Inventors during the Industrial Revolution fueled the rise of American industry by creating new useful ways that would help speed up and enhance people's lives.
Another inventor, Henry Bessemer, originally gained his wealth by inventing various types of movable stamps, and he also greatly improved the typesetter. However, his greatest inventions has to do with metal refining and making, specifically a new and a more efficient method of creating high-quality steel. Steel, now easily mass-produced, helped lead to technological breakthroughs and allowed industry to flourish. Sometime after Samuel F.B. Morse's invention of the telegraph, Alexander Graham Bell invented the working telephone. Along with inventing the telephone, Bell invented many other things, with a total of 18 patents. The telephone, however, made communicating long distances much more efficient. Thomas Edison was the greatest inventor of his time. He acquired over 1,000 patents and invented the incandescent light bulb and one of the earliest motion picture cameras. He also founded the first industrial research laboratory. As well as being a famous and highly achieved inventor, Edison was a successful manufacturer and businessman, successfully marketing and selling many of his inventions. He worked extensively on the telegraph and the telephone as well, which eventually led him to inventing the phonograph, which recorded sounds on indentations on a sheet of coated paper. He also worked on inventing a cheap and safe alternative to gas lights, eventually inventing the electric light.
Our next quote of the day comes from the renowned inventor himself, Edison. "There is no doubt," he wrote, "that I shall be able to store up and reproduce the human voice perfectly." This was on one of his inventions, the machine that talks, which was also known as the phonograph.
George Westinghouse, another American inventor and industrialist, worked on inventions mainly involving railroad safety, piping, and AC current electrical systems, and also adopting them in America. Some of his works in railroads included air brakes, which made trains much safer, compressed air signals, and devices to place derailed train cars back onto the tracks. His knowledge of air brakes was later utilized in creating new and more efficient ways of piping natural gas. His greatest accomplishment, however, was his successful work on perfecting the AC generator. He created technology that made lighting electrical systems much more efficient and useful on a greater scale. Aren't inventions and their inventors thrilling? I hope you were listening because now I have some questions for you. Question 1. Who invented the telegraph? Question 2. What are some inventions that made trains much safer? Question 3. What did the telegraph and the telephone make more efficient? Question 4. Who invented the incandescent light bulb? Are you ready for the answers? Samuel Morse invented the telegraph. Air brakes and air signaling sirens made trains safer. The telegraph and the telephone made long-distance communication much quicker and more efficient. And finally, Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Good job, everybody!
Dang, the Industrial Revolution helped the economy lots, even with the painful lives of the workers. You bet it did. To even get close to becoming the great industrial powerhouse the US was, it needed the natural resources of the time. These resources propelled the US to develop better technology, and even new business simply because they existed. Listen, hear that? It's the sound of iron spikes being hammered to make new railroads. Iron was one of these great resources. It was used to make steel. However, before the amazing pace of industrialization, the material was useless, demand wasn't huge, and profits weren't great. Then came the Civil War. It meant that much of the Union needed weapons and rails. This was one of the main drivers of steel production. Between 1860 and 1885, the railroads used up a third of all steel produced. Iron thus became industrialized, and the new resource of steel meant that industrialization went even faster. With new methods and new processes, steel and thus iron became massively important to the economy, to the point where economist J. Russell Smith observed that in the United States economy, 1,000 industries must have iron or steel, or they cannot go on. Then there's coal. Coal helped to literally fuel the massive expansion of industrialization. Coal companies hired millions of workers to work in coal mines in order to meet the demand, and unlike other companies, the coal industry could not simply introduce inexperienced and unskilled workers into the mines. The specialized craft of coal mining is one example of work in which the industrial economy depended on the skills of workers. However, coal companies weren't all that great. This primary source of a former coal miner, writing about a miner's life, gives a look into the life of working in the mines. As a rule, the miner rises at 5 a.m. He enters the mine shortly after 6. In some cases, he is obliged to walk a mile or more underground to reach his place of work. He spends from 8 to 10 hours in the mine. The miner's daily pay for the last 20 years will not average over $1.60 a day. His dangers are many. He may be crushed to death at any time by the falling roof, burned to death by the exploding of gas, or blown to pieces by a premature blast. So dangerous is his work that he is debarred from all ordinary life insurance. In no part of this country will you find so many crippled boys and broken down men. During the last 30 years, over 10,000 men and boys have been killed, and 25,000 have been injured in this industry. The average age of those killed is 32. It's an endless routine of dullness from 9 years until death, a sort of voluntary life imprisonment. Few escape. Once they begin, they continue to live out their commonplace, low-leveled existence, ignoring the daily danger, knowing nothing better. Eventually machines were introduced, but in general, the coal industry was embarrassingly primitive. Miners and operators dug coal, bought it, and sold it in the 1900s in the same ways that they had for generations. Coal mining was a tough life, Nick. Then there was oil. Oil at first was not recognized because people didn't know what it could do for them. It was not until after 1850 that society began to reap the benefits of oil, creating new inventions ranging from heating lamps, car fuel, and in some instances, heaters for homes. However, the story of oil cannot be properly explained without our very own J.D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller was the one that made the biggest impact on the industry. He got into it at a young age and moved on up to form the Standard Oil Company. From there, he became the richest man in the world. To do so, he created an entire monopoly on the market. He bought out his competitors so frequently and coarsely that eventually he got a 90% share of the nation's oil market. He was quite smart, but his methods were less than clean. He used his firm's superior size to undercut his competitors and then bought them out. He even, in some cases, hired hooligans to go bother his competitors. In general, he was kind of a mean man. However, looking at him from the whole, he really was the basis of modern marketing practice for major corporations and dictated the new rules of commerce for the nation. Not a great guy, but a genius nonetheless. To test out your knowledge of what happened, we're gonna do a little bit of a trivia game for you. Alright, your first question is, what new transportation system really hurried along the industrialization of steel and iron? Your second question has to do with the mines. Although it was essential to the development of the nation, life in the coal mines were pretty rough. What did these coal workers have to face? Question 3. In what way was the coal industry different than the rest of the industries that industrialized? The new transportation system of the railroads used a massive amount of steel and iron in order to lay down their tracks. It really helped along the industrialization of this raw material. Work in the mines was terrible, and not to mention the many dangers that miners faced. In addition to the dangers that the miners faced, no one would insure them, and job security was not very good. Well, unlike the other industries, coal needed the skilled labor of its employees. Technology wasn't developed until later in the mines, and so it took a lot of practice and experience to be able to mine coal effectively. Historians have actually found that life as a coal miner, as long as you were experienced, wasn't terrible, simply because they needed the amount of expertise